I'll look at the camera instead of you.
Yes, I think we're live. Hello. we Karen and I were just talking and we're here a couple minutes late, but that's okay because I'm so excited to welcome you to what I am sort of lovingly referring to as episode 1 of the Sarah Casada live show, which feels like it's overstating it a little bit, but I like it. I like a little bit of hype. So I am so excited today to have Karen González with me. And I was thinking, actually getting ready for interviewing you, trying to remember how we first connected on the World Wide Web. And I think it was through Twitter or something like that. My first real memory is reading an article you had written for Christ in Pop Culture about Jane the Virgin, which I'm obsessed with. So I was like, anyone who writes about Jane the Virgin is a friend of mine. And although I think we actually knew each other before then, but that definitely is like a standout moment. But Karen actually wrote the study guide for Love Undocumented, which is the book that I wrote, if you're new here, about immigration. And she just brought such a great perspective and such great questions. So if you are ever reading my book in a group or a small group or any sort of gathering of people, I highly recommend the study guide that Karen wrote because it's excellent. And it's available for free on my website as well. So Karen, would you just please introduce yourself? I'll give kind of the internet introduction, which is that Karen is a writer and a speaker and an immigration advocate. She has a book coming out this spring that I am so excited about called The God Who Sees. Did I say that correctly? Yes. And I can't wait to ask you a few questions about that, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself as well.
Sure. So my name is Karen, and I am actually, one of the connections that Sarah and I had is she's married to a Guatemalan, and I am from Guatemala as well. Oh. And yeah, I think I loved and connected with you because of your blog and reading your immigration story, or rather Billy's immigration story. As I work for an organization that serves primarily the foreign-born in their U.S. work. So I work for World Relief, and we do refugee resettlement and immigrant legal services. And yeah, as I read Sarah's blog, actually through a colleague, is the one who alerted me to it, our mutual friend Matt Sorens. And yeah, and I started reading through your blog. And so when I started working in immigration work, it was in a legal clinic, and I was doing church engagement, so trying to educate churches about what the Bible says about welcoming immigrants. And I was also doing legal work. I actually went through the law class, through the training to do nonprofit legal work, which you can do without a law degree. It's the only kind of law you can practice without a Juris Doctor and without passing the bar, as long as you work for a nonprofit that's recognized by the Department of Justice, and that you also charge very low fees because it has to be affordable. It's for the purpose of having more services available to immigrants. And as you probably know, legal work of any kind is incredibly expensive. And so we have a network of not only trainings, but also churches that take part in that program. So that's how I kind of came into immigration work, and I began to reflect a lot more on my own story. And actually, when I submitted to your blog, Sarah, I remember reflecting on just how easy it can be to disconnect from the immigrant community once your immigration story is resolved and you just move into the future and you lose those relationships and connections. Yeah. And so yes, so I'm an HR professional. I'm also a writer. I'm also a cat lover and a taco enthusiast.
I'm with you on tacos, not so much on the cat.
Okay, it's okay.
I have so many questions, even just from your introduction. I did not know that. Well, I knew that there were people who were engaged in immigration law who were not lawyers, but I did not know sort of some of the nuances of how people are practicing that or what that actually means. You know, it's something that has intrigued me. Well, I've always been amused by the connection between writers and people who major in English in college and people who become lawyers, because it's so many of the same skills of like constructing an argument and
Mm-hmm.
communicating an idea, moving people's emotions. Like there's a lot of overlap. So I've always found that really fascinating. One thing with my blog, and even really more so since the book came out, I'm always very I don't know if hesitant's the right word, but people email me asking about their specific immigration cases and asking for my advice and support. And I'm always like, I suggest you find a lawyer, because there's so many nuances and so many different things that I'm like, I can tell you our experience, but I can't always tell you the ways that would transfer to your experience, particularly based on what's typically shared in an email. But yeah, there's such a need for that. So it's great to hear that work is happening, and
yes,
that churches are trying to figure out ways they can engage in that way. I think especially, this is a bit of a tangent, but as a lot of the narrative from the church has been about people following the law, then if you can get people from your church to help people. One of the women that shared actually at my book launch, who is a dreamer, made a comment of, I would love to follow the law. Like if there was a way for me to do this and follow the law, I would 100% be on it. And I think that's helpful for churches to know that people want that kind of engagement, and if that service can be provided. So that was a bit of a tangent.
And I think what you tell people is really great advice too, because telling them to go, I always recommend to people, the Department of Justice has a website with nonprofit legal help for immigrants, because lawyers they have to specialize in immigration, and some only specialize in employment. And so nonprofit legal help is such a great service to the immigrant community. It's not as fancy. The offices and waiting rooms aren't as nice. But yeah.
I think I wrote about this in the book, that the waiting room that I sat in reminded me of the Truman Show, because it was like all the terrible things that could happen to you. Like they were trying to, make people aware of all their rights and the circumstances to not find themselves in. But it just reminded me of Jim Carrey, like Airplanes with Lightning, except it's not fiction, which makes it less amusing. But I am so excited that you are writing this book, and you're publishing with Harold, who I also worked with, and we have the same editor. So that's what we've been swapping stories about how much we love her, and just the whole process of writing a book. So I'd love to hear about what inspired you to write this, and a little bit kind of how your immigration story ties into that.
So as I began going to churches in like the Baltimore and Baltimore County area and talking about immigration, so I would sometimes preach on a Sunday morning on welcoming the stranger. So usually what I did is I went through the story of Ruth. So as I was reading the Bible, I realized the story of Ruth is the only story in the Bible where an immigrant, a person in a vulnerable situation, is treated the way that God's law commands. And this person becomes a blessing to that community, and they are a blessing to her, in her time of need. And it reoriented me in my Bible reading. I started reading the Bible with eyes of seeing all the stories of strangers and foreigners, sometimes victims of human trafficking. So these are not willing immigrants, of course, but that the Bible is full of these stories, and that there's this like meta narrative in the Bible of people moving from stranger to citizen, to family of God, the way that Ruth does in her story. And so that piqued my interest, and I started learning more about that. And we're talking people like Joseph in the Old Testament, and Abraham and Hagar, and even the strangers that Jesus encounters, the woman in Mark who he calls a dog, essentially. And so that really piqued my interest. But I also started thinking about my own immigration story. So one of the things that is well known with people who are immigration advocates who are Christians is that immigration is not just it's not just an opportunity for us to love our neighbors and serve them, although that's certainly enough of a reason, but it's also a missional opportunity for us, not in the sense of thinking of people like missionary projects, but For years, many of us through our churches gave to missions, and now these people are coming to our doors, and it's a great opportunity for us to show them tangibly the love of Christ, not just in word but in deed. And so I started thinking about how much that played into my own immigration story. I grew up in a family that was very nominally Catholic, and my immigration journey is very closely tied to my story of faith and coming to faith. And so that's really the inspiration. And so when I drafted the proposal, it was around, I want to intersperse my story of immigration with the story of biblical immigrants and foreigners. And so in my book, I have 5 chapters dedicated to my story of immigration, and then 6 chapters that are dedicated to different biblical immigrants and sort of what we see in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm so excited because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you, is if you had sort of always seen the Bible through this lens, or if that was kind of a turning point at some point. Because I will say, in my own writing process, I had biblical themes or stories that I wanted to unpack. But then as I kind of got in the writing process, there were areas where that wasn't immediately apparent to me. I wanted to kind of think through, what did I want to write about connected to a specific topic. And for me, one of the big ones was I had a chapter on the sanctuary movement. And, I think I even wrote this in the book of I kind of actually struggled writing that chapter because while I'm interested in the sanctuary movement and I had done some research and some interviews, I realized that when I was really trying to grapple with what do I think about this, or what have I seen, I had a hard time understanding it kind of from a place of faith. I wasn't sure what to do with it. This idea of, people who might violate immigration laws in attempt to save their families or protect their kids, that I understood. But this idea of kind of breaking a law to draw attention or to, I just kind of didn't know what I thought about it. And then it was all of a sudden I read the story of Esther, and it was a completely different experience. This idea of her breaking a law of going before the king in order to protect her people. And it was kind of just reading the Bible this whole different way for me once I kind of started keeping my eyes open, I think, to where there are migrants and immigrants in the Bible, or people of different ethnicities living cross-culturally. You just see it so much.
Yeah.
I loved the story of Ruth and Naomi because I was it was this story where both of them had the experience of living as a foreigner in the other woman's country. Mm-hmm. And yet how that kind of connected them in these really powerful ways that it was revolutionized, I feel in some ways, the way I read the Bible. And so I love that your book is titled after Hagar. That's one of my favorite. Well, it's not titled after Hagar, but the name Hagar names God, which is one of my favorite names of God, or stories of how God's named. I just love that piece so much, this idea of the God who sees me. So I'd love to have you unpack that a little bit and sort of how that became the title and the connection between, I don't know that I've thought about Hagar as in that her immigrant experience, or how that would connect in.
Well, it was really interesting because I don't think I ever really thought that much about Hagar. I knew this fact that Hagar is the only person in the Bible to name God, and she names him the God who sees me. But really, that's all. I'm oh, that's a really exciting, cool fact, and it's really awesome that God sees us. But what really inspired me to name the book "The God Who Sees" is that Hagar is an enslaved foreign girl. She's brought into the household of Abraham and Sarah, and she's not treated well. Sarah mistreats her on several occasions, and Abraham never really speaks up for her. And she flees into the desert 2 different times, and she, like Mary, are women to whom angels appear with a message.
Mm.
And the message is that God sees them and their situation, And in Hagar's case, tells her, you're going to have a son, also, and you're going to name him Ishmael. There's a lot of parallels between the story of Mary, this Annunciation story. And, God doesn't appear that way to Sarah, even though Sarah's considered the mother of our faith, like Abraham's the father. Sarah laughs, which is why Isaac is called Laughter, right? She.
And I also have a son named Isaac. Yeah. There's a lot happening.
Yeah. So I found it so striking that, I started thinking about many of my relatives when we first came to the U.S., my grandma, my mom, several of my aunts had worked as undocumented, like housekeepers, and how this was like Hagar, this like servant in a household in a foreign land. Other people were the masters and mistress. Other people were important and, had big promises from God. But yet God appeared to her and God communicated his love and care for her. And God made a way for her and Ishmael. And so to me, that was so powerful when you consider the stories of immigrants, that we're living in a political moment where they're being demonized, they're being scapegoated, and so many are suffering. We work with refugees and we know the situation, and throughout the whole West is like this. Immigrants are not being welcomed, and God sees that. God sees them. God sees their suffering, and God is with them in that. And I don't say that to minimize their suffering, but there's something powerful in being seen and being recognized. And so often, there are people that we don't see, right? Because we don't know them. And so anyway, that's what moved me toward that title and toward Hagar as this really special person, in the Bible that we often overlook.
Yeah, absolutely. It does feel like she kind of comes on the scene and then she's gone, and we're sort of all focused on Abraham and Sarah and their kids. And I'm really captivated by that idea of her sort of taking center stage a little bit in this story. What was the most fun part for you to write in the book? What did you enjoy about, or what topic did you enjoy diving into?
So I think the chapter I enjoyed writing the most was on the woman in Mark that Jesus encounters, and she asks him to heal her demon-possessed daughter, and he says, I'm not going to give to the dogs what is for the children. And he kind of dismisses her, and she says, but even the children eat the crumbs, and Jesus says, you're right. And he affirms her faith. And she's a foreign person. I mean, she's foreign, she's pagan, she's unclean because she has a demon-possessed child. And yet she has this encounter with Jesus that is Jesus, who was a master of verbal retorts, who put people in their place all the time with words.
Yeah.
Her, no, I affirm your words.
And a really eloquent story. I wish I could illustrate my points with timely stories on a dime like that.
Yes. And so I love that chapter because I found this biblical commentary that talked about sass and the power of sass. And that, we speak words not because we always believe that they're going to bring change, but because they preserve our own humanity and our own solidarity with other image bearers of God. And that really struck me as really powerful. I think that's a chapter I enjoyed writing the most because, she speaks up and her life changes, Imagine walking away from Jesus, knowing that you've encountered this holy man, and now he affirmed you, he healed your daughter. I mean, how would you go back to your life after an encounter like that? And so, yeah, that was my favorite, I think.
Oh man, Yeah, that's powerful. Just listening to you tell it, I'm like, I've never thought about it like that. It's very, it's just such one of the things I'm learning as I get older that I just love about the Bible is there's just so much there. I feel like having grown up in the church, having grown up reading the Bible from a very young age, every time I go back to the Word, there's more there to uncover, to reflect on, to learn about the character of God, and it's just really powerful. And so I'm excited to see in your book. I haven't read it yet, and I can't wait. All of the ways that you kind of draw out these stories of people living in at cross culturally or as foreigners in different countries and the ways that they experience God. I'm very excited. As a last question here to kind of wrap up, let's tell people where they can get your book and where they can connect with you as well, because I would love for one thing I do know that I am learning about writing is that people who buy your book before it comes out are a big help. So if you're listening to this right now, I'm going to go ahead and say this so Karen doesn't have to. You should go ahead because it's available on Amazon, right?
Yes.
Yes, it's already up on Amazon. So you can go ahead and order it now. You don't even have to pay for it now. You can, you'll forget that this ever happened if you're like, that's like, what happened 4 or 5 months ago? But then you'll get this awesome gift in the mail when it comes out in the spring. So
yeah.
So yes, that's my little plug. Go ahead and do that. And I'll also include the direct link in the comments of this conversation. But Karen, go ahead and let them know where else they can connect with you.
So I have a website, Karen-Gonzalez.com. And I'm also on Twitter and Instagram @_Karen J. Gonzalez. And so you can find me there always talking about baseball or theology or Taco Tuesday.
Not so much the cats, huh?
Not so much cats,
Not a lot of cat videos. Awesome.
No, I follow my cats separately on Instagram accounts. So
you follow your cats on Instagram?
No. I only have one cat, but there's like all these there's like an account called Emergency Kittens because sometimes you need one and it's an emergency. I
think they call that the dark web, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there's all kinds of cat accounts I follow on Instagram.
Oh, that's so funny.
My cat does not have one. I draw the line.
Yes. Lots of people have accounts for their pets, and it's just not something I do. I have this poor dog that's sleeping now by the door that is almost never makes an appearance on social media. Bless her heart. She's, I don't know. We were very involved, and then we had kids, and then now I feel like she's like, well, okay, guys. I'm so thankful for your time today, and I'm so thankful for sorry, things are popping up on my screen to have me sign into Adobe. No, thank you. Yes, thank you so much for joining us. I just wanted to have these short conversations with people that are doing amazing things with writing and making the world a better place. And I'm thankful for you and the work you're doing at World Relief and elsewhere. And I'm thankful to those of you watching. So feel free to let me know in the comments who else you would like me to interview. I've got a few slots left open for what I am now referring to as season 1. And so, yeah, I'm excited to be able to have these conversations. And thank you so much, Karen, for joining.
Thank you, Sarah.
Bye.
Bye.